else interested, I can abstain and take myself out of this as well. Okay, so Member Lewis, would you like to put a motion on the floor related to the committee?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I move that myself, Member Lewis, and Chair Moore compose the advisory committee to the.
I second the motion.
Okay.
So it has been properly moved and seconded that Member Scott Lewis and myself, Chairperson Moore, establish an advisory committee comprising of ourselves to work alongside the DOJ Research Center and the 5 individuals named to develop a scope of work for the economic consultancy position. Is there any discussion on the matter? Member Tamaki, you're recognized.
Yeah, just a short comment. I mean, I really anticipate, I think the idea of having 2-person, both Chair Moore and Javon Scott Lewis, is great to get the ball rolling. We have to move forward. But I also anticipate the economists saying, well, how big the universe is. And then I anticipate a sharpening of that discussion, but then ultimately bringing it back to the task force, because that is our prerogative. That's what everybody is saying. That's what Michael Newman is saying. That's what everybody believes. And at that point, there'll be a pretty robust discussion about what the universe of remedies are going to be, which in turn will inform the advisory committee and the experts that this is the will of the task force. But in that process, we'll get to know the experts and the task force members. I presume there'll be a presentation of some kind just to get the ball rolling. And at that point, Professor Grills and Member Holder and some of the others, we'll ask questions. But I think that's a good process to get it going. But it's kind of like, what do we do first? And it makes sense that the advisory committee goes forward, but then I anticipate it coming back to the task force because it has to. So just a comment.
I will say, this is me doing my due diligence. If we're going to be on this advisory committee, I know there was a comment made about potential conflicts of interest for the tasks for these individuals named, and so I'm just opening space. If anyone wants to kind of articulate what that means, which might be helpful for us, for members Scott Lewis and I, to kind of communicate back to the research center and these 5 individuals, that could inform our work with developing the scope of work. Are there any other comments or questions? If not, on the conflict of interest comment made. Okay, hearing no further discussion, I will go to Parliamentarian Johnson so that a roll call vote may be established.
Thank you. Voting on the motion to establish the members of the advisory committee: Chair Moore.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Member Bradford.
Aye.
Member Grills.
Aye.
Member Holder.
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Member Scott Lewis.
Aye.
Member, Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp.
Aye.
Madam Chair, there were 9 members voting, 9 ayes, no nays.
Thank you. There are 9 ayes, no nays. The ayes have it, and so the motion carries. An advisory committee will be established, which will comprise of myself and Member Scott Lewis. So we'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is potential action items scheduled for future meetings of the task force, presentation by myself and Member Scott Lewis. Can the California Department of Justice staff put onto the screen the future hearing proposal that Member Scott Lewis and I came up with for the benefit of the public and the task force members, please. If you don't have it handy, I can try to use my screen. Please let me know.
I'm getting it up right now.
Thank you very much. And then once the presentation is on our screen, I'll let member Scott Lewis take the lead.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I'm assuming everybody else can see the proposed schedule. So as you see here at the top, we are in our current meeting for January 2022. So what's important to note is that Chair Moore and I were tasked with not only determining the locations of our future meetings, but to try and sketch out the topics of those future meetings. And what's important to note is that according to our original schedule of meetings, as initially proposed by the DOJ at the beginning of the life of the task force, where we are in that original schedule would be around meeting 6 out of 10 meetings. So as everyone knows, because we've been virtual up until this point, we agreed a couple of meetings ago that we would count or begin counting our 10 meetings that were provided to us by the state once we began meeting in person. And so there's a great deal of variability in what the schedule looks like going forward, depending on when we actually move to in-person meetings. So what we have on the screen right now is that the February meeting and the March meeting, because of Governor Gavin Newsom's extension on the of the requirement to meet virtually, the next 2 meetings are planned to be virtual. So what we have to do as a task force is decide if that is in fact lifted, not continued. One, are we comfortable beginning meeting in the months that follow, or do we want to remain in a virtual format? The other thing that we have to note is that according to the original schedule, we would actually be, we would be left with only 4 meetings, right? However, because of the circumstances of the way that we've planned our meetings and held our meetings, we actually have 8 more meetings or so remaining. Was there a point? I can't see everybody. Let me. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to, as a task force, one, decide on the timing of those meetings. We need to decide on the location of those meetings once we move to in-person, and we need to decide finally on the subjects of those meetings. Based upon the discussion that we've just had, it seems appropriate to put the question of eligibility on next month's meeting. That would be my recommendation, but this is for us to decide. So what I will do very quickly before we move to discussion is quickly go over what Chair Moore and I have come up with. So it was actually recommended by one of the members of the DOJ that we commemorate Black History Month in a February meeting. So at the moment we have that as a proposed activity, and the idea there is to highlight the current and past reparations advocates, as well as receiving a report update from the DOJ. And I might ask Michael Newman later to come and say something about the timing of the review of the report and approval of the report and what impact that will actually have on the schedule. We have in March a proposal to discuss criminal justice, as that was on our original schedule, and we've yet to address that issue. That would take place in March. Then in April, we would have our first in-person meeting, which we are proposing to be held in San Francisco, which was a decision that we agreed upon as initially suggested by Member Brown. At that meeting in April, one of our biggest tasks will be to actually discuss the report and have a final report approval so that it can be released in June. The other point in April is that we would discuss on how to educate the California public on findings, using that report as, using the approval of the report, the discussion around the approval of the report as our, let's say a kind of proper attempt at deciding how we are going to actually communicate what we've discussed over the past several months of meetings to the California public. And of course, it's important to remember that that task is provided to us as a requirement in Article 2 of the AB 3121 bill. So the report, or Report 1, will be released on June 1. The next meeting would then be held in July, and that would then be in Los Angeles. Sorry, I need to expand it on my screen. Okay. So then the discussion of the report, the release report, there's a celebration of the report, a discussion about the report and the findings and the preliminary recommendations will be held in that July meeting. And then, prior to Dr. Weber's visit yesterday, Chair Moore and I thought that the July meeting would be a good time to finally discuss the issue of eligibility. But as I mentioned, I personally would recommend moving that up to our February meeting. What that would then represent is our pivot to stage 2 of the task force, where we would then begin to hear testimony and to begin to debate and deliberate, or at least have preliminary deliberation on the actual issue of what our reparations recommendation might be. Could you go to the next page, please? So as you would have seen, that the September meeting, where we would begin to discuss the issue of reparations, understanding and having testimony on various models of reparations, the recommendation was to have that take place in the historical Black town area of Allensworth, moving the meeting to its first Central California location. Then after that, the recommendation or the suggestion is to have our November meeting in Sacramento, where we would discuss the issue of reparation and restitution and restoration. Then moving to January 2023, we would move back to Southern California, to San Diego, where we would discuss the issue of compensation. Then after that, we would come up again to Oakland, where we would start with what Chair Moore and I decided were the two parts of extensive and intentional deliberation. We're very mindful of the fact that we did not want to get to a place where we were left in the last meeting to discussing exactly what the proposals were going to be. So we wanted for there to be significant time, or at least sufficient time, to actually discuss our recommendations and to actually bring debate around the question of reparations and what we're proposing to the meeting. And so in February of 23, in Oakland, we are proposing something that we're calling Reparations Recommendations Part 1. And then in April of 2023, we are suggesting holding our meeting then in Inglewood, where we would take part in Reparations Recommendations Part 2. As you can see from the bulleted items, we would be thinking about very specific remedies, very specific recommendations, and we would be dedicating our time to discussing them. And then June 2023, we suggested to move the final meeting to Sacramento, which we thought it was appropriate, given its location, where we would have a presentation and an approval of the second report. Chair Moore, if you have anything to add, please go ahead.
Thank you for that. So the only thing I would add is, what we can do is, the task force, we can take comments or questions and insights based on the information presented. but I also wanted to provide an option or alternative where the task force can, vote to approve, let's say, the agenda for, February and March, and then as an advisory committee, Javon and I, a member Scott Lewis and I can kind of return back the task force next month and kind of rework this based on any comments or insights that you all have today. So that's all I would have to add. Lewis, is there anything else? Does that sound right? I can't see anyone, so.
And just for reference, in the meeting materials, this proposed is on page 201.
Oh.
You want to just pull it up and see it firsthand without having to look on the screen.
Since we can't see each other, can I speak, Chair Moore? It's Don Tamaki.
Yes, Member Tamaki.
So what would help me a lot is to start setting the dates of these meetings, because the longer we wait to set those dates, the more difficult it is. I'm sure everybody's calendar starts to fill up, and it makes planning really, really difficult. So I don't know how you all feel about that, or the Department of Justice, but for me, putting these dates up and fixing them so that we, schedule around them, or, know that we're going to have a quorum. I think that's important to me.
Yes, so Attorney Newman can actually speak to the quorum dates. I believe we have some. Attorney Newman?
Yes, sure. So a couple of things. First is we do have some quorum dates. They are informed by your responses to the doodle poll. I'll just remind you all, and Member Tamaki, to your point, in order to plan ahead, we really do need the members' availability and the members' responses to those doodle polls. That's what we go off of in order to gain availability. Also, clarify one thing about the virtual or versus in-person issue, which is Member Scott Lewis and Chair Moore laid out meetings starting in March, which would be after the expiration of the governor's order. And I mentioned this yesterday in my DOJ updates. One of the things we'll want to do is get the task force's decision on if an emergency order is extended after the previous meeting, so meaning after the March meeting but before the April meeting. We would like to get a vote from the task force as to whether there is a preference to retain the in-person meeting or to shift to virtual, based on the extension of the executive order. And that would be important because we'll need to make those, we need to include that in the notice. So looking at the February meeting, and I don't know, Member Scott Lewis or Chair Moore, if you want to get into more detail of the plan of the February meeting, but the February meeting, I think the plan is for it to potentially be one day, and you have quorum dates on February 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. And I will make a note that the task force has asked for us to have Professor Erwin Chemerinsky provide testimony, and we have his available dates as February 23rd and 24th, which are also quorum dates. So either of those dates would work if we wanted him to be a part of the meeting as you've envisioned it for February. So just to recap, February 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. But 23rd and 24th of the dates Professor Chemerinsky are available. Then I'll also say that in March, the quorum dates are March 28th, 29th, and 30th. And we believe we also have Professor Chemerinsky available on March 29th or 30th. when you have a quorum. And those are all of the quorum dates for potentially one-day meeting in February and a two-day meeting in March.
Thank you, Attorney Newman. And just to veggie back off of what he just said, in terms of what Member Scott Lewis and I and the DOJ were thinking about, and for our February meeting, that it would be a one-day meeting to commemorate Black History Month. But during the meeting, we would have a discussion or celebration of reparations advocates in the past and in the present. And then we were also thinking of having Dean Chemerinsky, as part of his expert testimony on the community of eligibility, maybe also give a more broader lecture on constitutional law and Reconstruction and how that relates to reparatory justice efforts, particularly in California. And then, of course, in March would be our, as scheduled public hearing on mass incarceration, war on drugs, and the criminal legal system, as well as hate crimes. And so, I can't see anybody, so I put in the moderator chat if we could just move the paper off screen temporarily for now. Great. Thank you. So, yes, Member Holder, I see.
No, I was just going to ask you if you could just put the first page up really quick for a second.
Yes.
Okay, I'm good.
So I just have a clarifying question for Attorney Newman. So, with this discussion, would it be helpful if we voted on particular specific dates right now, today, or is this something that, right, for February and March, or is it something we could do offline, given that we already have some dates we would probably have to.
Well, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So I think first and foremost, there's two things that I think we need to vote on. One of them is whether what form the February meeting takes. That's sort of the next thing, the next agenda item. We keep popping through agenda items, but the next agenda item is setting the agenda for the next meeting. We currently have the March meeting up there because that's what's in the original plan. But of course, you're proposing a February meeting, whether that's one day or 2 days. I think the task force needs to take that up. And then just to confirm the dates so that everyone can plan, and frankly, so that we can then go start planning for the witnesses in February. But we'd also like to set the date for March so that we can, because that's going to be the subject matter of that meeting is going to be pretty jammed. So we'll want to start working on those experts as well. And we're just trying to confirm that there might actually be more quorum dates in February for a one-day meeting, potentially 23, 24, 25, and 26, which is a Saturday. But reconfirming Professor Chemerinsky's availability is still the 20th. I know I'm throwing a bunch of dates and information out. So if we take it sort of in order, I think first is the question of whether you want to have a one-day meeting as you've conceived that's split between somewhat ceremonial memorial, and then the second half, which is, as Member Scott Lewis mentioned before, a critical date, which is we do need to set aside time in the February meeting for you all to evaluate and consult with the DOJ on the draft of the task force's report.
Yeah. So are there any thoughts on what we should do, whether February should be a one-day meeting or a two-day meeting? Member Lewis? Lewis?
I think February needs to be a 2-day meeting. And I say that because I think it's appropriate for us to spend, one day or part of a day commemorating Black History Month. We do have to discuss the draft of the report, and as I mentioned earlier, I think it's an appropriate time to finalize the eligibility question. And so those three issues require 2 days. And I'm not sure if I missed, but I was unaware of Dean Chemerinsky's availability in February. So on those days. So if he's available, then that marks to me an appropriate time to have that discussion around eligibility, given that he has some view on the matter.
Okay, so then that would mean that the meeting would have to be the February 23rd and 24th, because those are the only dates in February that Dean Chemerinsky, as we know, is available. So, Member Gross?
So I just wanted to clarify something. So we received something from DOJ that had a February-March combined, I think, set of topics. And so I tried to compare to see if the topics that were on that agenda were showing up on the agenda that you and Member Scott Lewis came up with. And for the most part it is, but 2 items don't seem to be appearing. One is the history of policing, and the other is anti-Black bias, basically talking about hate crimes. So what are we suggesting that with the proposed agenda that you shared, that those would get dropped off, or they can get put in somewhere else?
Chair Moore, I can speak to that.
Yeah, sure.
So the agenda, because we were developing an agenda for your consideration based on the original vote and direction of the task force from Chair Moore's original presentation, what we've labeled the potential February-March agenda in the meeting materials follows that original agenda. As the agenda stands, that would essentially become the March agenda in full as you see it, subject to your vote. And the February meeting is being added, sort of like the January meeting was added in. The February meeting is being added, or February, March. One of those meetings is being added in as an additional meeting since we're still virtual. And the meetings aren't, it's not part of the 10 in-person meetings. So we're just adding more meetings while we're virtual. So hopefully that addresses it. But essentially what we're taking up right now are both the February and the March meetings.
And so then the community of eligibility, which is on that combined February-March meeting, would move to February? Is that what I'm understanding? Because we said earlier that, well, it was discussed earlier that we need to have that conversation sooner than later, particularly as it relates to the work of the economists.
If I may, that's what I'm proposing. Yeah.
It's subject to your all decision and vote. And I think what would happen is, because that's set up as a presentation on scope of work and report 2 outlined from the DOJ Research Center, which was intended to be a follow-up from yesterday's discussion, that would essentially become part of the February meeting as this sort of new thing that you just voted on, which is the advisory committee and the discussion of the experts and the scope of work.
Yes. And at the March meeting, where we'll be discussing criminal legal system, war on drugs, and mass incarceration, to your point, Member Grills, I think the history of policing will be on there, and anti-Black hate crimes.
So are we at the point then that we're just needing to make a motion to approve the entire slate laid out, or the next 2 meetings, like the February and the March?
That's up to the task force. I think we can do a vote to approve the next 2, and then we can come back and refine if needed, or we can just do a vote to approve the entire proposal.
Since I'm just seeing it now, I feel more comfortable. I mean, I haven't had a chance to really think about it. I'd be more comfortable with a motion to approve the next two meetings, and then we can agendize the remainder after we've had a chance to kind of think about it and make sure there's nothing missing that we feel would be important.
Member Scott Lewis.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I agree with Member Grills. I think it'd be best just to approve the next two meetings. Chair Moore and I really wanted everybody to kind of take a look, think about the subject matter of the remaining meetings, because we are actually in uncharted territory, because we, right, after the March meeting, we have effectively 3 or 4 meetings worth of material from the original schedule that we can actually either stretch out or supplement over another 8 meetings possibly. And so we do actually need you all to think about the content of what will be addressed in those meetings. So we're just putting forward a preliminary suggestion about what might be discussed. What I will say is that one of the principles behind what we recommended in say they call it the second half of the schedule, is that we want to make sure that we have enough robust debate and consideration around actually what reparations are, right? And so we didn't want that to be a contracted discussion, as it kind of was in the original plan, which was about 3 or 4 meetings worth of discussion. The other thing that we really want your feedback on is to make sure that there was agreement with the geographic representation of the locations of the in-person meetings. And so if you can take a look at that, and I'm not sure what the mechanism for communicating, I mean, I know we'll have to come back to a discussion about it, but I don't know, Michael, if there's some way that you could communicate to get some feedback so that we come into the next meeting with a good sense of where folks are on these 2 issues, meaning the content of the remaining meetings as well as their locations, if they are to be in person.
Sure, we can discuss this with all the members in the one-on-one meetings and formulate that into our future plans. I will say essentially there's the 3 meetings that need to be sort of resolved, I think, in this meeting or moving forward, or at least an understanding is that we do need to have a meeting in April, probably in mid-April, for the purpose of final approval of the task force's first report, so that can be formatted and published by the June 1 deadline. So that's essentially what is defined right now, and that's sort of been defined by the task force's original votes as to both the meeting schedule and then your vote in, I forget which meeting it was, but maybe it was the October-November meeting, about how the task force wants to engage with the final report. So we need a time in the February meeting for the task force to work through the report, and then we need time in the April meeting for the task force to do a final vote, which will be the final vote. And from that point on, it's final and done, and we'll be moving to get it formatted for publishing. So those are the only, I would submit, those are the 3 things we want to figure out. We don't have obviously quorum dates yet for April. We don't know whether that's going to be in person or remote. So that is why I'm also asking for a vote on whether or not, if the governor's executive order is extended in April, should that be, do you all want to have that be virtual, or do you want to choose to have that be in person? Because we'll have to start vetting locations. And then when we do our doodle poll for you all, we'll need to evaluate your availability for both in-person and virtual meetings. So it's essentially 3 meetings I think need to be resolved in now. And then the rest of it, I agree, you all can come back as an advisory committee and present a more fulsome plan for the future meetings, potentially after you resolve some of these questions that you'll be working with the experts on.
All right, so just based on that statement that we have to resolve 3 meetings, I do want to just make an observation. I think in the April meeting, you should definitely have some decisive discussions about communications and messaging for the publication of the report and how we want that messaging to roll out. So I don't know whether that means that we need to have comms people at the April meeting or not. But there has to be a place to discuss communications and messaging in April.
Okay, great. Member Tamaki?
Yeah, I was just going to say I strongly agree with that. I think that the signature deliverable, that's most tangible and immediate is the report. And I think because it's so comprehensive and in many ways, an eye opener, I would say, for most Americans by far. I think it's going to be a big deal. So it'd be great if we really, really get ready for that.
Yeah, and the one other thing I was going to say is, and I don't know whether we need to discuss this with the comms people in April, but we should talk about Juneteenth and whether we want to have some messaging around that date. I definitely have some ideas about that, but I think it's a critical inflection point for the work that we're doing, and we should be thinking about that maybe in April.
I am mindful of time. I do want to move the agenda along. And so, based on the discussion we're having, it seems as if we are going to just solidify what occurs in February, March, and April in terms of dates and topicality. And so from what I'm hearing, we want a 2-day hearing in February, in part based on Chemerinsky's availability, which is February 23rd and 24th, where we will commemorate Black History Month, finalize the question of eligibility, and of course, discuss the pending report or impending report. And then, and that will be a virtual hearing in light of the governor's executive order. And then in March, we have the quorum dates of the 28th and the 29th, where on the hearing proposal, we'll discuss the war on drugs, the history of policing, anti-Black bias, and a continuation of the discussion of the report. And Attorney Newman, I just have one clarifying question. Are you saying that we need to clarify today in this meeting whether the April meeting will be virtual or in person?
Well, if the executive order is terminated, then it's got to be in person. So the question is, does the task force want to vote now, theoretically vote in February instead? But for us to be able to plan, it'd be helpful to know ahead of time. But we need to have a vote from the task force whether, if it is available, the task force would prefer to meet virtually or if the executive order is lifted, whether it would prefer to, well, I'm sorry.
It's confusing.
I confused myself.
It's terminated, right?
Right. If the executive, presuming the executive order ends when it does, the task force will be meeting virtually. If the executive order is extended, the task force has the option of meeting virtually or in person with COVID, protections. That's the question that we need to get answered so that we can schedule as necessary.
Okay. Does anyone have any strong feelings about, about if the executive order is extended, whether we would want to continue to be virtual or elect to meet in person? Member Tamaki.
So I have a question for the task force members and Michael, and especially those in government. I mean, you all, probably member Joan Sawyer and others are dealing with this. So as a member of the public, I kind of assume that if the governor extends the order, that's basically the best practice recommendation. That is to say, if you can avoid indoor in-person events, that would be what most people would do. And unless I'm mistaken, and based upon that presumption, I guess my vote would be to meet, virtually. But I do want to say, if the will of the task force is to meet face to face, I'm there. But I view these governor's orders as basically here's what people should do if they have the choice. So maybe you all can clarify that for me.
So when you talk about the Assembly and the Senate, and I think even the governor's office, there's a new term of art that we now use because of COVID. And what we generally say when it comes to indoor events, indoor meetings, gatherings of any kind, we will say, and I quote, out of abundance of caution, we will not meet with with people in person. We will not have fundraisers and events because the last thing you want as a governmental agency is to have an event and then you are the super spreader event. And not only is it embarrassing, it's kind of careless, and it's when it comes to public health. That's why when the governor makes an edict based on what the medical professionals say and the public health professionals say, we almost always go with what they say. Because if there is a super spreader event when we have session, we will tell members that have come in contact or believed to have come in contact with somebody with COVID that out of an abundance of caution, they can't come to the meeting to vote. They can't be anywhere near the Capitol. They can't get in a car with another member. They can't get in the car with special services. You become quarantined for 5 to 10 days, depending on your situation. And so I would suggest that we adopt kind of the same cautionary provisions. Again, the last thing we want is there's a serious outbreak and they go back to this task force as the one that's the super spreader. So I guess I'm saying whatever the governor says, let's follow what precautions he puts out.
Okay, member girls. Mute.
I'm sorry. Is it possible then for me to make a motion on all of this or take a stab at it? Okay. So I move that we approve the February, March, and April meetings as laid out by members Moore and Lewis, Chair Moore and Member Lewis. And with the April meeting, that it will be in person if there are no governor's orders. If there is a governor's order, that it will then be virtual.
Is there a second?
Second. Second.
Okay, it has been properly moved and seconded that the February, March, and April hearing topics are approved as outlined by myself and member Scott Lewis, and that in the event that the executive order from the governor is not lifted, we will meet virtually. We'll continue to meet virtually. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no discussion, I'd like to turn to Parliamentarian Johnson so that a roll call vote may be established.
Yes. Yes, the motion, I will call the roll for the motion on the floor. Chair Moore,
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown,
Yes.
Vice Chair Brown votes yes. Member Bradford,
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills,
Aye.
Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder,
Aye.
Member Holder votes aye. Member Jones Sawyer,
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer votes aye. Member Lewis,
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki,
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Stepp,
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp votes aye. Madam Chair, 9 members voted, 9 voted aye, and 0 nays.
Thank you. There are 9 ayes and 0 nays, and so the motion carries. The ayes have it. So the next item on the agenda, Parliamentarian Johnson, is there a way that I can just kind of skip to another agenda item and come back quick? Because I think item number 24, which is agenda for the next meeting, kind of coincides like perfectly with what we're just discussing right now. So like,
You can reorder the business. Yes.
okay, great. So I'm going to reorder the business and just go straight into a discussion for a potential action item, the agenda for the next meeting, which would be in February. So I would kindly ask for staff to put onto the screen for the benefit of the public and the task force the agenda that staff has helped assist with creating for the February meeting. It's the document that Grills mentioned earlier. Yes, thank you.
Chair Moore, may I be recognized?
Yes, Attorney Newman, you're recognized.
Thank you. So just a couple of things about the agenda, as I mentioned earlier. So this is essentially can be considered an agenda for the March meeting.